Stepping into a new leadership role means managing yourself through a time of heightened uncertainty. It's also a transitional space, an opportunity to remake yourself and transform your way of being and operating. And you can do both by examining and evolving your leadership identity. I'm Neil Beerbaum, and I help advancing leaders to make sense of the soft skills landscape, navigate uncertainty, and build high-performing teams. In this video, I'll show you how to manage the uncertainty that comes with a leadership transition and to do it in a way that will give you confidence in your first 100 days and set you on a growth path to becoming the most effective leader you can be. First up, a distinction. Your leadership identity is how you see yourself as a leader, what it means for you, and what you stand for. Your leadership brand is how others see you. And we tend to focus more on the brand, while our leadership identity runs unconsciously or certainly less consciously in the background. And your real position of power comes when the two are aligned. So what do we mean by identity? Well, the subtitle of this channel says leadership is a role, and it's one of many that we play in the world. And one day you might move through the roles of husband, father, colleague, leader, subordinate, friend, and back home to father. And your identity is what each role means for you and how you choose to show up in that role. You can think of it as the adjectives that you'd add to the role when you're describing it. For example, you might believe you're a dedicated husband, a strict but fair father, a hardworking colleague, and an inspirational or ethical leader. And those terms are not your whole identity, but they point to it. And your brand is what other people think. It's what might emerge from a 360 survey, for example. And it may or may not match your leadership identity. While you think you're an inspirational leader, for example, others might see you as simply friendly but ineffective. And that alignment between the two is important, but it's something we'll look at in a future video. And if that video is out by the time you see this, you'll find the link in the credits below, perhaps also as a card on the screen here. Today, we're focused on your leadership identity. And your leadership identity might also contain other elements apart from what I've mentioned. So, for example, your race, gender, religious beliefs, whether you're white or black, male or female, gay, Christian, Muslim, any of those things. And you might ask how those will be perceived, how you'll be respected or not because of them, and how much of them you can legitimately bring to your role. In the past, those would have been more in the background. Today, they're much more in the foreground. And being a leader might also mean other things to you. It might bring you a sense of pride and accomplishment after all you've been through to get there. It might bring a sense of fulfillment, the sense that you're living your purpose. Or it could be a justification after someone said you couldn't do it or didn't give you a chance way back when. So in other words, it's about what the leadership role means for you. And you might also doubt your right or your ability to be there, whether you deserve the role. So it's not necessarily all positive. And most importantly, a good part of all this that I've described might not even be conscious. You might not even be aware of it. It kind of runs in the background. And because it's unconscious, it affects how you show up. And when you're settled in your role as a leader, you tend not to question your identity relative to that role too much. So you kind of assume you're doing okay and your leadership identity solidifies. That's not always a good thing because it can mean we stop growing. And then those growth points are usually forced on us when there's a challenge, and especially when there's a change. It's in those times that we experience what we call leader identity uncertainty. So being promoted into a leadership role for the first time, or into a new leadership role, these are usually times of leader identity uncertainty. Even if it's a natural succession that's been planned for years, there will still be some uncertainty. Am I capable? Will I be accepted? And so on. And one especially tough entry point I've seen into leadership can be when you've been promoted from within a team to lead that team. And then you might ask, how will I lead my former teammates? Or will they accept me? What about the colleagues who also hoped to get the role? Will I need to work to get them on my side? And quite often the leadership transition happens as part of a restructure or changes in the business that are responses to change in the market. In a case like that, there are multiple layers of uncertainty. At the broadest level, there's environmental or market uncertainty. Then there's organizational uncertainty. And each of those will impact you in different ways and to differing degrees at any one time, and you'll feel different levels of influence over them. And here we're looking at what we could say is the third level, which is your personal domain, the leader identity uncertainty, which is the one that is most under your control. And your response to this uncertainty is a process which in coaching we call sense-making. In other words, making sense of what's going on around you, and most importantly, who you are within that, where you're headed, and how you're going to get there. And here are 3 sense-making practices that you can apply that will help you to manage leader identity uncertainty and be effective in your first 100 days. The first one is to recognize and acknowledge the uncertainty, to make it conscious, to bring it to the foreground, and while you're doing that, to reassess your typical approach to uncertainty. This is the most empowering thing you can do for yourself in a time of uncertainty, is to directly recognize and acknowledge the fact of the uncertainty, the fact that it's happening, that it exists, that you're experiencing it, and the impact it's having on you. So you're bringing it, as I said, from background to foreground. And a good way to do this might be to journal, to write it all down, to describe, in whatever format works for you, all the elements of uncertainty that you're experiencing, all your doubts about yourself, doubts about others, doubts about the future, and so on. And maybe you can organize them into some way. Certainly it will help you to get it out of your head where it forms a bit of an indistinct soup, and to make it clear. And the one thing you don't want to do with that is to go about things the way you always have. As I said earlier, a leadership transition is a good time to completely transform your approach, to bring some deliberate, conscious awareness to how you do things. And a good place to start would be right here with your ability to tolerate uncertainty and your typical response to uncertainty. So how do you normally respond when there's uncertainty? Do you move to control things? Do you become suspicious of everybody's motives? Do you become passive? Look at some past experiences and think of feedback you've received. And ask yourself, what is the approach of a leader? What would I want from my leader? What have I criticized leaders for in the past? And then start to think about what kind of leader you're choosing to be. And note that word, choose. You're responding now and not reacting. You're deliberately charting your way of being as a leader. And that means you've started the process of building a leadership identity, a conscious leadership identity. And ultimately, when people start to see and experience that, it will become your leadership brand. The second practice is to assess your learning agility, and maybe this is another new term for you. And there we're asking, how open, ready, and willing are you to learn and adopt new ways of doing things? How open are you to listen to others and to seek connection with the people around you, support from the people around you? Or are you someone who digs in deep and tries to prove yourself? Usually by doing things the way you've always done them, as I mentioned earlier. And something I've said in other videos is that leaders need to elevate the level of work to get everybody working at the highest level possible. That's really your main purpose as a leader, one of your main purposes. And you don't achieve that by over-managing people, by telling them what to do, by having all the answers, because then you're doing the thinking for them. And then you trap everybody at a lower level than what they should be or could be. As a leader, you elevate the level of work by drawing the best out of people. And to do that means taking an attitude of not knowing. In other words, instead of being the one who knows, be the one who doesn't know. In other words, ask questions, be open to learn from the people around you, even from those reporting to you. And if you're not directly learning, you're helping them to discover their own knowledge and their own process for thinking things through and coming up with their own answers. And so in that situation, and even beyond that, you're demonstrating an openness to learn and adapt to the demands of the role. And this learning agility is the key to your growth as a leader and the evolution of your leadership identity. And it's important because, as I said, leadership identity should not be static. It should not calcify. It needs to remain alive and be constantly evolving. And in this, again, you want to assess what has and hasn't worked for you in the past, and you want to keep assessing that. What would be the best approach for this context? So what's your learning agility? What kind of leader are you choosing to be when it comes to learning and growing? And the third practice is to evaluate your leadership claims and grants. And once again, maybe a new term for you here. And this is an important area. And here we're looking at what are called claims and reciprocal grants of leadership. So this means, what are your claims to authority, and are they being reciprocated by people granting you that authority? Alternatively, are you perhaps being granted leadership status that you're not recognizing and therefore not claiming? And here are some examples. So let's say you've been promoted from within the team, as I mentioned, and you're concerned about someone in the team who also applied for the position. And you're asking, will they grant you the authority that you deserve in their role? Or will they withhold and play politics and make it difficult for you? Or maybe you came from another division and you don't quite have the expertise you feel you need in this area, so you'll be relying quite a lot on the team. In other words, you have a bit of an imposter syndrome and you're wondering whether they'll grant you the authority that your role deserves. Then in some cases, you may not even be aware of this concern. You'll just be holding back and not claiming the leadership authority that the team is already granting. And people will wonder why you don't seem as fully engaged or confident as you could be or should be. So a good exercise here is to draw a relational chart, including your upline, your downline, and your colleagues, and assess or estimate what levels of leadership authority you're claiming in each of those versus what's being granted. And where the two are in balance, you can maybe move those to the side, but keep an eye on them because things change. And where there's a mismatch between claims and grants, you may want to think about what you'll do to create more of a balance. So perhaps you simply need to have a conversation with the relevant person and assure them of your confidence, or find out for yourself so that you're not assuming whether they are granting you that authority or not. Or maybe you need to find a quick win so you can demonstrate success and leadership to the others. So these 3 sense-making exercises will be a key part of your first 100 days. In fact, they'll probably peak in the first 30 to 60 days while you strive to make sense of the environment and yourself within the environment. Of course, in parallel, you'll be working on your business vision and strategy and ensuring team performance and maintaining your own personal effectiveness. And as you settle in, your leadership identity will start to take shape, and that will help you to gain confidence. And remember, your leadership identity is not a static thing. It's a never-ending project. So the business context is constantly evolving, and so are you. So do you need to be. Just because something works or feels right or has meaning today doesn't mean it always will. And when you neglect to pay attention to your leader identity, you kind of set yourself up for surprises and that heightened uncertainty when things do change and you haven't evolved with the times. So staying current in business doesn't just mean keeping up with market trends. It means constantly evolving your leader identity. You're watching The Leadership Script, where you learn to embrace the leadership role and write your own script. If you found value from this and want to grow as an effective and authentic leader, make sure you subscribe and also share it with others who you think will benefit. Leave some feedback in the comments about what you've learned from this video and what you'll be doing differently. Also, let me know through the comments what leadership issues you're struggling with that you'd like me to address. Be sure to check out the other videos on this channel. And if you'd like to engage in coaching with me, follow the link to my website or LinkedIn page. Thank you, and remember, leadership is a role, and you write the script.